Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webcast, How Do You Fix Accounts Payable with Canon Business Process Services and PayStream Advisors. We're very excited to have all of you on board, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. My name is Anne-Marie Cochia, Director of Marketing at Canon Business Process Services, and I'll be your moderator for today's webcast. Before we get started, I have a few quick housekeeping notes. We have a last-minute change on our Canon panelist. Kathy Bozar was unable to join us today. She was called on assignment and could not be here. Brian Cassidy will be sharing his insights from Canon, and I will introduce him in just a moment. To eliminate background noise, all participants have been muted. You will only be able to hear presenters speak. If you'd like to ask us a question, you may do so at any time by clicking Q&A in the WebEx dashboard on the right side of your screen. Type your question and click send, and we'll try to address your question before the end of the webcast for sure. Because we only have a limited time here, we apologize in advance if we're unable to address your question online, but we'll be sure to follow up on any unanswered questions after the webcast. Finally, lastly, we'll be sharing an archived version of today's webcast as well as the deck with all of you after the webcast is complete. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our accounts payable experts who will be leading today's discussion. First off, Henry Iams is the Managing Director and Founder of PayStream Advisors. Over the past 14 years, Henry has developed a voice for AP managers and controllers through his research publications and benchmarking assessments of companies in healthcare services, manufacturing, and higher education. He's developed many reports on the trends and strategies and transformation of purchase to pay. Henry likes to say he's passionate about payables. Henry, we're so glad to have you on board today. We thank you for carving out this time today to share your expertise.
What a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. And secondly, we have Brian Cassidy of Canon Business Process Services. Brian is a finance professional with over 20 years of experience in the entertainment, electronic media, and telecommunications industries. Brian brings a proven track record implementing procure-to-pay solutions, including scan and capture, approval workflow, vendor portal, vendor adoption, and change management best practices. Thank you, Henry and Brian, for joining us today.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. It's nice to be here.
Okay, well, let's talk about Canon Business Process Services. We feel we need to just give you a quick overview of who we are and what we do. I'll be very quick here. Canon Business Process Services is a subsidiary of Canon USA. We provide services that include business process outsourcing, document process outsourcing, office services, and e-discovery. We work primarily on-site with clients, but also provide them with the efficiencies using their own processing centers off-site and offshore. Our methodology is based on Six Sigma process improvement. Our services are customized, and we blend our technologies with the client technologies. We've been recognized as a top 100 global outsourcing leader by the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals. Before I hand over the reins to our first esteemed expert, Henry, I would like to thank PayStream Advisors for their work on the study that we'll be presenting next. PayStream has been a really great partner, and we're so pleased to have them on board today. Henry, over to you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and welcome, everyone. Let's have some fun today. I am passionate about payables, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of our insights from our latest research. Now, PayStream Advisors, for the past 14 years, has been publishing a lot of research around financial operations, from procurement to treasury, billing. Today, of course, we're talking about my passion area, accounts payable, and you're going to learn why I'm so passionate about it in a sec. But let's take a look at the report that we're going to highlight today on the next slide. This report is something fresh that we've been working on for the past 3 months. I'm going to share with you some insights about what's happening with outsourcing, because, frankly, outsourcing in this next slide was, well, it was a dirty word for a long time in AP land. it was like, well, wait a minute, we're going to take jobs and we're going to move them to other people. So on the next slide, we're going to show what's this report about, the case for outsourcing of accounts payable. And, you know, it was pretty interesting when we looked at this and we started doing some case studies and surveys, which I'm going to show you, that use of outsourcing is really on the rise. In fact, we thought that, well, only about 20% of companies that were thinking about automating AP go this way, and it's even higher than that. So we're going to talk in this report. I'm going to give you the highlights so you don't have to read it, but it's available to you free. Let's move on to the next slide. So when we talk about accounts payable challenges, here are the core themes that we've picked up. This is what everything you know. Most companies today, in fact, in our surveys, more than 50% of the companies that we've surveyed say that they're getting more than 70% of their invoices in paper. So paper still dominates AP, well, largely because even if suppliers email them to us, we've got to print them out to do something, which means we have manual entry, we have manual workflow, and it's hard for us to pay within terms. The average time that it takes to process an invoice in a paper-dominated environment is 23 days. That's from the invoice date to the day that it was approved and ready to pay, which means that, well, that's the average, but then we know that there's people, it takes more than that, a lot more, 30 and more. We also know that companies struggle with things like capturing discounts. Let's move on to the next slide. So when we drill in on the survey data that's driving a lot of our research is that we find that the folks like you who are telling us the challenges that they're having around manual entry and inefficient processes and heavy manual process for improving the ability to get early payment discounts. These are some of the main themes. Of course, many of us know that, yeah, okay, 35% or 40% of time of an AP staff is spent keying data, but it's much more than that. It's managing the exceptions, the reprocessing, the duplicates, managing the staffing when we have vacation or, well, those magical invoices that come in out of nowhere around December 3rd to need to be paid to the year end. Let's move on to the next slide. We're going to also talk about opportunities that you have around early payment discounting. Now, PayStream has created a 4-point maturity goals. For those of you who are still paper-centric, and that's probably everyone on the phone, your focus is on how do we get rid of the paper in AP, and you have a lot of options, and we're going to talk about those today. But as we move around this wheel to the 2 o'clock position, once the companies get rid of the paper, their business metrics change of managing AP. They become very efficiency-centric because now they have tools to monitor where the invoices are, how long it takes to process them, why it takes so long from a certain supplier, why are we having challenges with a certain buyer who's creating errors, or perhaps even why are we using blanket POs when we should be using discrete POs? So the organizations shift their thinking and really start focusing and honing in on cycle times and managing metrics like measuring what we call first pass rates. In other words, what's my exception rate? Why is that so interesting? Well, in the top half of this wheel, about 50% of the cost of AP is in the upper half. On the lower half, it's a little harder to get at, but it's around things like exceptions. An exception invoice costs 3 to 4 times as much as a standard invoice. So if the average invoice cost for your organization is $4.50, think your exceptions are costing you $20. Then organizations use this data to say, there's a business case for us to have more straight-through processing or touchless so that it doesn't have to stop in AP. What can we do to make sure it doesn't stop? Ultimately, you're going to be collaborating more with your approvers and your suppliers. And AP, the ones who've made it through this, they're focused on different things than managing staff. They're focused on things like how long does it take, how efficient are we, and how good are our controls that we have in our organization. Let's move on to the next slide. So we're going to use a poll question here to learn from you. What challenges are you trying to overcome at your organization? And why did you dial in on this session today? Why are you taking valuable time? we want to hear from you. Is it things like improving control and visibility? Is it reducing cost or improving the time that it takes so you don't get put on credit hold? Is it improving controls and visibility? We want to hear from you, and we'll share those results in just a moment. It's going to be great, Anne-Marie.
We'll take a minute, and hopefully our attendees will take a moment and provide your responses, and we'll share those responses in just a minute.
Anne-Marie, it's going to be exciting to see what our audience today is focused on, because we are going to orient the rest of our session to give a sense of what we're seeing in the marketplace and answer some of those key concerns and challenges that we're looking to overcome. Our title today is about fixing AP, and at the end of this 40-minute session, we want to give you some really very simple tools and techniques to think about, and things that we've been doing for the past 14 years at PayStream, when we've been advising companies about how to start the process to give you a sense of what you should be doing. All righty. Wow, look at that. Well, our top vote getter here is improving controls and visibility. Excellent. Wonderful. That's great. And our next, well, we have pretty good representation on the top, from reducing cycle times, costs, and implementing scanning and capture. Excellent. Let's move on. Okay, so we're going to do a case study. Perhaps you've heard of Fox Television, of course. I know you have. And the organization came to us. Their shared services accounts payable folks came to us with a problem. They said, we have already automated AP, but it's not working. In 2009, they tried to implement an imaging solution, but got bogged down with the technology. It didn't quite do what they wanted it to do. And well, there were several problems there. There was a lack of an IT infrastructure to support the new application. It was a newer tool. They were trying to use optical character recognition on their own. And, well, they just never got it to quite work what they wanted. So they came to us and said, what should we do? And the CFO was concerned. The CFO said, well, if I invest this money again, is it going to be, well, made worthless by something that's coming later? And how much should we invest in? There's so many choices, PayStream. Which way should we go? Should we go with electronic invoicing? Should we go with an imaging system? What's the best way to do this? Well, at the end of the day, we tried to answer their questions by analyzing and doing an assessment. And we're going to talk about assessments in a little bit. Let's move on. You can see the questions that came out here. How much should we invest? Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So we use a lens here, and if we advance to think about the themes that he needed to think about, we told him, said, look, there's 4 ways you need to think about AP automation. What are you going to do with your paper? How are you going to manage your matching workflow? That's the connection, the glue that connects your ERP system. How is it going to work with Oracle? What are you going to do about electronic invoicing? What's your strategy? Can you get more electronic invoices from your suppliers? Are they big suppliers or small suppliers? What percentage of them, based on PayStream's analysis, will convert to electronic invoicing? And lastly, what's your strategy to do more electronic payments? Now, as we go through that exercise, we know that that means there's a lot of choices. Let's go on to the next slide. And when we think about those slides, it means how are we going to overcome the barriers and the challenges to move forward? Here's what we know. Companies have choices, and a big one now, as I mentioned earlier, and we uncovered in our study, is it third-party processing of invoices. And it's not transformation of, hey, I'm going to give them the way Home Depot did. Home Depot in 2008, the CFO said, hey, we're sending all the AP operations over to India. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about component outsourcing. We're going to share with you what those components are. The component outsourcing is where specialists in services and resources, software, management of the systems manage this, either whether they're opening the mail, and you're going to see in a moment, or scan and capture, or doing the full cycle, third-party companies essentially are doing this cheaper, faster. That's why Canon is doing this. That's why we wrote this report sponsored by them to go in and find out what the market was doing. What we see is that the organizations that do this, and probably the most important outcome of our research was that organizations that use third-party services can get to those stage 3 and 4 automations, the efficiency and metrics and collaboration elements faster, because they bypass all of the mechanics of implementing software, working with the change management inside their organization, integrating with their accounting systems, and changing the supplier's behavior, which is a challenge for many of AP departments, and this is what was slowing down Fox Television. We believe that this is a long-term natural evolution, what we call managed invoice processing, of the adoption of many things, like, for instance, in your organization, the way you receive checks today, most of you have your checks going to a bank through a lockbox. 30 years ago, those checks were opened up at your organization, but today banks do it so cheaply and so well that we just let them do it. It's a similar theme inside of accounts payable. We're starting to see more and more of the AP managers, controllers, and CFOs are saying, why should I be doing this internally? And asking the core question, do I have the right people to do this internally? Do I have the right people, and do I want to use them in a different way? Do I want to make them more strategic and value-added? And so let's move on to the next slide and see how we stratify this. The organizations that we found that were outsourcing, here's what they were outsourcing. This is probably pretty interesting. Supplier onboarding. In other words, how am I going to get my suppliers to change their behavior for electronic invoicing? Image invoicing and indexing. Nearly 40% of companies outsourced said, I want somebody else to do the imaging and the index. That typically means opening the mail, managing the mailboxes, and a big piece here, managing the data entry. These are the top ones you can see. And then there's other things around inquiry systems, telephone processing, utility bills. There's pretty much a provider can do the whole thing, or they can do components of it. And this is probably the most exciting piece, is because we found that the people that do outsourcing, they do it sometimes piecemeal, and then they grow with it over time because they realize, hey, this is an improvement on what we're doing internally. Let's go on to the next slide. So the models that we see, starting at the 12 o'clock here, are basic. The paper, the management of the invoices, sorting, batching, separating, scanning at the 1 o'clock position. Then as we move around, the data capture. As I talked about, those first elements are between 35 and 40% of the cost of an AP department. And by the way, if you don't know your accounts payable cost, PayStream has a cost per invoice calculator. You can calculate your cost in about 5 minutes. Just Google PayStream cost per invoice calculator, and it'll give you the results. Now, when we go down to the 6 o'clock position, this is related to, okay, we've scanned the documents, we've captured the data off of those documents. Where are we going to store them for retrieval, for archival, for reporting purposes when we get audited, when the state sales and use tax auditors come in? What are we going to do to run the reports? And then we get into the technology elements around approval, matching, and workflow. So you can purchase all of these from Canon and others, or you can purchase a component of them. That's probably what was the most interesting switch from when we did this study a few years back. Let's move on to the next slide. The benefits that we saw from the companies that we interviewed is that we see a better performance for organizations because they use something called a service level agreement. That means if I was hiring Canon, I want to get them to commit that 99% of the time they're going to process my invoices within 48 hours or 24 hours, depending on whatever service level agreement you need to support your business. Typically, they found lower cost. Why would you do it if you didn't get lower cost? And the unclear one to many folks when they're starting this, and Fox didn't quite understand this, is that they had an opportunity to get the best technology without the cost of setting it up front and implementing it. So that means lower upfront overhead to transition to the greatest technology. In other words, let somebody else manage the spaghetti of the technology, because that's what they do for a living. And the lead time. In other words, what we call the conversion cycle. How long did it take before they were truly paperless in AP? With solution providers like Canon, that can be done in a matter of weeks, but for most companies, within several months. I'm working on one right now that we've been able to set them up in 8 weeks. Go lives in about 4 weeks. All righty, let's move on. So it's time for me to turn it back to, well, Anne-Marie, who's going to introduce our next speaker, Brian.
Thank you, Henry. Thanks so very much. So, Brian, are you on?
I am here, yes.
Excellent. So, Brian will talk us through how Canon approaches operational excellence and efficiency in AP.
Terrific. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you very much. So we wanted to share with you Canon's approach for taking you from your current state, which is probably very paper-based, to an automated state that's best in class or world-class. And our real-world experience has taught us, we've developed a methodology based on our real-world experience that we've broken down into 3 primary components. And the first one involves centralizing and digitizing your invoice ingestion process. That step right there is pivotal, and it really sets you up for further process refinements downstream. Once that's in place, you're then in a position to look at your organization and assess the tasks that you perform and determine which tasks make sense to retain and which tasks makes better sense to partner with an outsourced provider. And then thirdly, once those two pieces are in place, you're then in an optimal position to look at further automating processes downstream. So that's the methodology that we recommend. Let's jump to the next slide and talk about centralizing and digitizing invoice ingestion a little bit more. So this is, as I mentioned, a pivotal step. It really should be the first part of your overall AP transformation. And what are we talking about here? We're talking about communicating to suppliers where to send their invoices to a processing center where the invoices can be opened, organized, and they're scanned. And from that scanned information, the pieces of data that you need off that invoice in order to process it and post it and pay it, we capture it according to your business rules. The benefits of that approach are, 1, you don't have to deal with paper. 2, we have everything in the same place. 3, we have the ability to validate the information up front. So yes, we are still kind of at the mercy of what they put on their paper, but if it's deficient, if it's missing something that you need, supplier just doesn't comply with your requirements and they don't put their PO number on their invoice. We're now in a position to isolate that, kick it out to an error queue and have somebody take a look at it and not have that invoice that's missing something, slow down processing of everything else that's just fine, okay? A lot of benefits by going to an automated approach for ingesting invoice documents. All right, let's go to the next slide. Once invoice ingestion is in place, it's a perfect time to take a look at your organization and determine what it is in AP that you want to retain and what it is that makes more sense really to partner with an outsourced provider. Okay, we know that we're using optical character recognition to capture and extract critical pieces of information. What that really means is we don't need people to manually input invoices into the payment system or into the ERP system any longer. That's a task that consumed a lot of man hours, and we've automated that task. So it's time to look at those bodies and figure out, is there a better way to use them? Can we repurpose some of these FTEs into other places within the organization? We're lowering our AP costs by doing so. We're increasing our accuracy, and we're freeing ourselves up to focus on more higher value added activities, like putting out fires or getting back to important people in the organization or getting back to key suppliers. Okay? This is the optimization process phase. Let's go to the next slide. Once we've automated invoice ingestion and once we've reassessed our AP organization as a result, we're now perfectly positioned to look at and adopt an automation approach and strategy. And by that, I really mean automating the processes downstream after invoices have been ingested. And for the most part, what that really means is approval workflow for your non-PO invoices and coming up with a vendor portal approach for taking in invoices electronically and getting completely away from paper, which is really the ideal end state. Many companies are kind of enticed into investing in an automation solution right up front, and they don't get the benefits that they were promised because they haven't really done the fundamental work, laid the groundwork to succeed with this tool at this stage. Okay? So that's the methodology. Yes.
Brian, before we move on, I do see that we have a write-in question. Let's see. How long does it take for companies to adopt workflow automation from start to finish?
So that's a great question. It's really going to depend on your organization. There are a number of things that organizations will need to do in order to succeed in implementing and deploying their workflow tool. One, they're going to have to define who their approvers are. If they don't have that already, they're going to need to do that. They're going to need to communicate with their IT department. In fact, they're going to have their IT department on board. It's a very tight partnership. There's integration that IT will work on with your automation tool. Vendor master information, purchase order information, payment details. That information gets pushed out to the automation tool so that your suppliers can look up their POs, they can turn their POs, flip their POs into invoices, and when those invoices get paid, they can see the payment information through the supplier portal. That frees up a lot of phone calls that come into the AP department. So to answer the question, it can be anywhere from 60 days to 2 years, depending on the size and breadth of your organization. That's a great question. Are there any more questions, Anne-Marie?
I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Okay, great. So let's now turn to the procure-to-pay process. These are the services that Canon provides in the purchase-to-pay process. And those are listed, we're lining up what we do, what we can partner with you on in the P2P process under the orange tabs. To the left of that, in the procurement and the receiving area, these are P2P tasks that would remain in your organization. So that's the procurement process, it's the purchasing process, creating POs, getting those POs approved, and it's also the receiving process. But from that point forward, we can partner with you in a number of areas. So as I mentioned, we can partner with you in ingesting your invoices electronically and capturing the information that you need via OCR technology. We can partner with you in digitizing your mailroom, just handling your mail, scanning on. We can do scanning on-site on your premises if that's required, or we can do it off-site at our business processing centers. And I think I mentioned, but I'd like to just emphasize again, the benefit of scanning and capturing through OCR technology allows us to pre-validate the invoices before they get to you so that we can make sure the invoice is complete. Invoices that are not complete, we can segregate and develop workflow for resolving. We also can do exception management, which I mentioned we can do on-site or offshore. So again, these are invoices that are deficient. We can establish a process where we resolve, or we can work with you or partner with you on the best, most effective way to resolve exceptions. And then finally, in the payment phase of the process, while we will not be executing the payment, that will always remain with you. What we can do is assist with account reconciliation, P-card transaction reconciliation to the general ledger, vendor account reconciliation, or posting entries into your ERP system if there's not a way to automate that. Down below, administratively, we also offer help desk services, reconciliation and analysis, supplier onboarding services are something that we can assist you with or take the lead on. We can assist with audits to help your compliance people, and certainly reporting and dashboard analytics are something that we can assist you with. Okay, so that's where these are the services that Canon can partner with you on in the procure-to-pay process. Let's go to the next slide. I think now we're going to talk about a case study. That's right. So we want to share with you an experience that we've had with a recent global cosmetics leader. It's a large multinational company that approached us because they had invested heavily in automating the purchase-to-pay process, but they were still dealing with a significant amount of pain. So they came to us in a situation where they were 100% PO, which is really quite extraordinary. They're a global company, as I mentioned, but here in the U.S., they're processing 18,000 invoices a month that were all paper. So they had kind of automated a portion of the process, but not really done that critical piece, which is automating the ingestion of the invoice. They approached us, and their objectives were to set up an off-site scan and capture process utilizing optical character recognition, or OCR technology, and then create an electronic invoice from that and pass that through and integrate it into their workflow process. So we set up at our business process center, we worked with them in communicating to their suppliers where to send their invoices. We gathered their business rules and requirements. We set up the rules in the OCR tool, and we began scanning and then capturing invoice information and integrating it, passing it off electronically into their workflow tool. After some initial refinements, I'm happy to say we're at 99.8% efficiency. So we have very few invoice documents that fail to come through the system properly. OCR has come a long way in the past 10 years, and it's really in a very advanced state. We use latest technology, and we're very happy to say that this company, the global cosmetics leader, is very pleased with what we've been able to do to enhance their process. All right, let's go to the next slide. So it's wise, I think, to take a few moments and just highlight some key considerations before you embark upon transforming your accounts payable operation. At the top of the list, it's pivotal that executive management supports this effort. One, there's going to be an investment that your organization is going to have to make in transforming the organization. And two, it's going to touch upon a lot of different stakeholders within the organization. And without executive sponsorship, your chances of success are greatly diminished. The other key really is knowing your AP processes, where they are and what they are. And in large, diversified, distributed organizations, there can be many AP operations going on in territories around the globe that don't get a lot of visibility. Identifying these processes, knowing where they take place, knowing what they're doing and who is operating them will go a long way toward getting the transformation process correct. Okay? It's also very important to really be clear about your goals and expectations. The CFO obviously is a huge stakeholder, but so are people that are in the business that are impacted by suppliers who get paid slowly, perhaps. The AP department is a huge beneficiary. There's a lot of wins for AP in this process. Each of them may have slightly different goals, but it's very important that you understand them, and it's a good idea to have them documented so that you can kind of use that to level set your operation. And then, of course, as I think I mentioned before, it's very important to determine what stays in-house and what makes better sense to put elsewhere when you're assessing your organization. Does it make sense to take these tasks that are low value and put them in a place where we can do it for less? We can do it cheaper and more effective and more efficient. And then, of course, it's very important to select a model that really fits your organization. It fits what you're trying to accomplish. It doesn't take too much out of the organization. You have a coherent plan, you've communicated the plan, executives support the plan, and it's a plan that's realistic. It's always a good idea to break things down into component pieces, digest them slowly, take baby steps before you try to run. But really tailoring a process that fits your organization, and every organization has a different culture, is very critical. And I think that is everything.
So Brian, I believe we do, and Henry, we do have a few writing questions here. The first one, tell me more about an AP assessment. Is this something we can do on our own? Brian, do you want to...
Sure, I can take that. So an AP assessment, this is a great question. An AP assessment is an internal look at what you're doing today, and it imposes a certain amount of discipline and rigor. I know here at Canon we have a structured approach for taking a deep dive and assessing the current state of AP today with every customer, every client that we work with. It is something that you could do yourself. That's probably something that you want to partner with somebody on who's done it before. But nevertheless, it is the kind of discipline you need to put yourself through in order to really truly understand what you're doing today, and then from there be able to figure out what makes more sense to partner with an outsourcer and what makes best sense to retain in-house. It's a great question.
Okay, well, thank you. I do have another one here. Compared to offshore double key entry, how does the OCR compare? Does OCR still have problems recognizing characters?
OCR, I think, as I mentioned, has come a long way. It's very advanced at this stage of the game. I'll be honest with you, there are people that prefer double-blind key because it's a human that's involved. Typically, this is done overseas, offshore, in a very low labor cost market. It also is not perfect, but clearly where things are going is in the automation direction. And at this point in time, OCR is extremely advanced. It does require a little care and nurturing when you first go live, but and that's because you can't get all the rules just right. But in the old days, it was much more cumbersome. Now it's not nearly as cumbersome, and frankly, it's in my opinion, it's the way to go. I think it compares very favorably. In fact, it's a better process, in my opinion.
Okay, I do see another one. Wow, okay, so we have another question here. We work with multiple ERPs and business units. Can you feed us the invoices to each ERP and or business unit?
So that's a great question. The answer is yes. That's not uncommon. This is something that we would identify in a deep dive assessment. It's a basic business requirement in order to be able to communicate with multiple ERP systems. It involves, frankly, file format that needs to be sorted out between us and the customer, but it's not unusual. In fact, it's really kind of more of the norm than it is the exception. So that is something we work with all the major ERP platforms, SAP, PeopleSoft, Oracle, Lawson, and many of the others as well. And if you're running a proprietary system, it's not out of the question that we would not be able to integrate with it.
Okay, I have another one for you. Where are your data processing sites?
So we have data processing centers here in the U.S. located in Salt Lake City and in New York City. And then we also have an offshore processing center located in the Philippines. They're good questions.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we're out of time at this point. And that concludes today's presentation. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. We hope you found the insights helpful. If you have any additional questions for Henry or Brian, or would like to learn more about how Canon Business Process Services is helping other companies cut costs, reduce invoice cycle times, and advance AP performance, please contact us directly at the email addresses. And we also want to thank again Henry for joining us today. It's been a pleasure working with you and partnering with you on this study, and we do appreciate your insights today.
My pleasure. What fun to have share my passion.
Thanks so very much. Thank you.